5:47 a.m. number alarm needed. Just thunder. Hooves pounding earth like war drums. Apple branches snapping. Crack, crack like gunshots in the dark. And the smell, thick, wet manure hitting my screen door like a slap, flooding the house before the sun even rose. I stumbled to the window barefoot, heart slamming. 100 black and white Houston, trampling rows my grandfather hand-planted in '62. Trees I'd babied for 11 years, pruned at dawn, wired in storms, finally paying off. Drip lines burst, mud everywhere. 6 mature Honey Crisps already flat, gone. I froze. 4 seconds, maybe 5. Then I saw her. Renata Holloway, president, parked in her pristine white SUV at the road's edge, arms crossed, smirking. She locked eyes with me and gave the tiniest smug little wave like she'd won. She taught me exactly how to take her entire world apart piece by piece until her precious reserve fund was mine. What would you do if someone turned your legacy into a feedlot at dawn? Be honest. Drop it in the comments right now. My name is Cord Beaumont. I'm the guy who inherited 7 acres of apple and pear orchard in the Shenandoah Valley and thought the hardest part was going to be the farming. I was wrong, but we'll get to that. My grandfather, Elmer, planted the first trees in 1962, not because he had a business plan, not because some consultant told him apples were a good investment. He planted them because his father had land, and his father's father had land. And in the Shenandoah Valley, you don't let good land sit idle. I grew up running between those rows. Rough wine sap bark scratching my forearms, the heavy, sweet smell of apple skin warming in August sun, bees working the blossoms so loud you could hear them from the road. It wasn't romantic. It was just home. Elmer passed in 2009. The orchard came to me, 7 acres, a 1971 cider barn, and about $40,000 of deferred maintenance. I was an HVAC technician at the time. Bad back, decent instincts, zero farming experience. Most people told me to sell. I told them I'd think about it. I never thought about it. What I did instead was learn the hard way. I remember one February morning, fingers so stiff from the cold, I had to hold the pruning shears with both hands. And my daughter, Waverly, 9 years old, standing next to me in the row in her 2 big boots, handing me cut branches without being asked. She didn't want to be inside. She wanted to be here. I looked at her and thought, okay, we're doing this. Waverly grew up in that orchard the same way I did. By the time she was 12, she was running the entrance table on pick-your-own weekends, collecting waivers, directing visitors to the right rows, explaining the difference between a Honey Crisp and a wine sap with more confidence than most adults. She'd come home with apple sticky hands and mud halfway up her shins. Every dollar from those weekends, every jar of cider sold at the farmer's market, part of it went into her college fund. That orchard wasn't just land, it was the plan. Her plan. So, when the certified letter arrived, rubber-banded to my mailbox on a cold February morning, HA seal on the envelope. Official and self-important, I figured it was a clerical error, the kind of thing you clear up with one phone call. Here's the thing about Ridgeman Estates. The development was platted around my land in the late 1990s. My grandfather refused to sell when the developer came knocking twice, so they built the subdivision around the orchard like water forced around a rock. For years, the HOA left us alone. The previous boards were run by reasonable people who understood the history. Then Renata Holloway got elected president. She'd moved into Ridgemont Estates 4 years earlier, retired pharmaceutical sales manager, regional director level. The kind of person who'd spent 20 years driving a leased SUV between hospitals, smiling at doctors, hitting quarterly targets, and confusing the ability to sell people things they didn't need with actual intelligence. She ran for HOA president on a platform of protecting property values and community standards. She tried to buy me out twice, politely the first time with a number 10% below market, less politely the second time with a vague comment about how certain operations were affecting the neighborhood's trajectory. I said no both times. She did not like that. The letter said, my cider barn, built in 1971, 28 years before this HOA existed, was a non-conforming commercial structure. $500 a week until I tore it down or brought it into compliance. I called the number on the letter, got voicemail, left a message, never heard back. That evening, I stood in the barn. Warm yeasty smell of cider fermenting in the tanks, amber light from the work lamp, the low hum of everything I'd built, and I made a decision. I was going to that HOA meeting. Folder in hand, facts ready, reasonable man, reasonable request. I should have brought a lawyer. Before I left for the meeting, Waverly looked up from the kitchen table. "You're bringing the folder, aren't you?" "I'm always bringing the folder." She shook her head like I was hopeless. 14 years old, and already she had Elmer's expression, that slow, patient look that said, "You're going to do what you're going to do, and I'll be here when you get back." I grabbed the folder, my jacket, and one more thing. My phone voice recorder app opened before I hit the door. I'd done some reading the night before. Virginia is a one-party I consent state, meaning if you're part of a conversation, you can record it without telling anyone else in the room. I'd stumbled across that fact at midnight while searching HOA dispute forums sandwiched between someone's pay, asked about fence height violations, and a very angry thread about leaf blowers. Didn't seem important at the time. Turns out it was one of the most important things I did that entire year. The February air hit me like a wall outside, cold and sharp, frozen ground and bare wood. The orchard dark and still behind the barn. I stood there 1 second looking at the rows. Then I got in the truck. The Ridgemont Estates' community room smelled like stale coffee and someone's perfume working overtime for a Tuesday night. Drop ceiling, fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly unwell, folding chairs in neat rows, and almost every one of them full. I noticed that immediately. These meetings averaged maybe 12 people on a good night. Tonight there were 43, I counted. Old HVAC habit. Old HVAC habit. When something looks wrong, you measure it before you touch it. Renata sat at the head table in a blazer, the color of authority. I found out later she'd spent 2 weeks working this room before I ever walked in, door to door, telling neighbors my cider operation attracted fruit flies, that my equipment noise was dropping property values, that the smell from the barn on warm days was, her words, inconsistent with community standards. She hadn't invited me to this meeting. She'd built an audience for it. When my agenda item came up, she gave me the floor with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I stood and laid it out. My barn predates this HOA by 28 years. Virginia's Right to Farm Act, Code Section 32300, exists specifically to protect agricultural operations like mine from exactly this kind of local overreach. The fines had no legal basis. I wanted them rescinded. I was polite. I was specific. I had printed citations. That's when the man in the back row stood up. I hadn't noticed him. Good suit. Practiced calm. The kind of calm that cost $400 an hour. Apprentice Gable, HOA attorney, retain, apparently. For this specific Tuesday, he addressed the room, not me. The room, in the tone of someone explaining something regrettable but unavoidable. The Right to Farm Act, Gable said, had a nuance I'd overlooked. During the period the HOA was formed in 1999, my grandfather had leased the orchard to a cousin. That created a technical question about whether the land was in continuous, active agricultural use at the moment of HOA formation, which affected whether the Act's protections fully applied. I felt the floor tilt, not because he was right, because he was prepared. This wasn't improvised. Renata had paid someone to find the one thread in my argument she could pull, and she'd pulled it tonight in front of 43 people before I had any time to respond. And every time I tried to respond, she cut me off. Robert's Rules of Order wielded like a scalpel, out of order, not germane. The chair recognizes she'd memorized that rule book for exactly this moment. I could see what was happening, and I couldn't stop it. So I stopped trying to stop it. I stood one final time and said loud enough for the whole room, "I'm contesting every fine in writing effective tonight, and I have one question for the record. Is this orchard parcel inside your boundary on the official county recorder's plat, not your CC and RS, the county's document?" Silence. Renata said it was in the recorded CC and RS, and that was sufficient. "That's not what I asked," I said, and I sat down. She moved on. Meeting adjourned. I walked out into the cold parking lot, gravel underfoot, sharp pine and frost wind coming off the Blue Ridge, the fluorescent light from the community room still leaking through the glass behind me. "Hey!" I turned. Older man, Broad shoulders, quiet eyes. A surveyor's measuring stillness about him. The kind of person who has spent a career reading land and doesn't waste words. I was on the original survey crew for this development, he said. Low enough that no one else could hear. 1998. The orchard parcel was never supposed to be in that plat. A pause. Somebody put it there after I drew the line. He held out a card. Fletcher Oaks, retired land surveyor. Pull the original survey file from the county recorder's office, he said before anyone else thinks to. Then he walked to his truck, started it, and was gone. Tail lights disappearing into the dark at the end of the lot. At the end of the lot. I stood there in the cold for a long moment. Pine in the air, gravel quiet under my boots, the distant sound of Ranatada's SUV pulling away in the other direction. Something had just shifted. I could feel it the way you feel a pressure change before a storm. Not the storm itself, just the air going different, the temperature dropping 1 precise degree. I went home. I looked at Fletcher's card for a while. Then I picked up my phone and called a real estate attorney in Stunton named Davia Merritt, who came recommended by 2 separate people as someone who was very good and did not lose. It was 11:15 at night. I left a voicemail. I didn't sleep much after that, but not from worry, from the particular restlessness of a man who has just realized the other side made a mistake they don't know about yet. Davia Merritt called me back at 7 the next morning. Not because she was eager, because that's apparently just when she starts working. I'd expected cautious hedge everything, attorney language. Instead, she listened to the whole story. 7 minutes, no interruptions, then said, "The survey question is interesting. Go to the county recorder's office today. Ask for the original 1998 plat survey for Ridgemont Estates. Don't call ahead. Just go." I went that afternoon. The woman at the counter found the file in 20 minutes. Oversized blueprint paper folded so many times the creases had gone soft as cloth. I spread it on the review table and found Fletcher's boundary line immediately. Clean, precise, exactly where he said it was. The orchard parcel was outside it. Not close to the line, not ambiguous, clearly, unmistakably outside. I photographed every page, sent them to Davia from the parking lot. She called back in an hour. "Don't pay anything yet." I wasn't planning to. 3 weeks later, Renata made her next move. In terms of sheer volume, it was impressive. 3 separate zoning complaints filed with Augusta County. Same day, coordinated. The first alleging my pick-your-own operation was an unlicensed retail establishment. The second claiming my gravel lot violated stormwater ordinances. The third asserting my cider press was an unlicensed food manufacturing facility. 3 complaints one morning all at once. I stood at the kitchen counter reading the notices and felt something unexpected. Not panic, not even anger, recognition. This was the same move I'd seen from bad contractors my entire HVAC career. When someone gets caught, they don't fix the problem. They create 5 new ones and hope you lose track of the original. Overwhelm the system. Overwhelm the person. Waverly came downstairs, looked at the 3 letters spread across the counter and said she sent more than one. 3. A pause. Then that seems like a lot of work for someone who's definitely going to lose. 14 years old. Elmer would have liked her. Davia handled all 3 in 10 days. The retail complaint collapsed first. Virginia's agorism statute explicitly protects on-farm sales and pick-your-own operations as agricultural use. No retail license required. The county zoning officer called Davia's office, unprompted, to ask why the complaint had been filed at all. The stormwater complaint dissolved the same way. My gravel lot predated the relevant ordinance by 14 years, grandfathered and untouchable. The food nurturing complaint was the only one with any edge, and only because I'd never formalized a state permit for the cider press. Gray enough that Davia said to just clean it up and remove the target. I filed that week. 60 days later, I had the permit. By the time the county reviewed the complaint, it was already moot. 3 complaints, 10 days, all 3 gone. But here's what mattered more than winning those 3 rounds. In the process of building our defense, Davia had gone deep into the county records, formation documents, CC&R filing history, the complete paper trail of how Ridgemont Estates came to exist on paper. She was looking for the exact moment the orchard parcel appeared inside a boundary where it had no legal right to be. She found it. She called on a Thursday evening. her voice carrying the careful precision of someone who has located something significant and wants to be exact before saying it out loud. Someone added, "Your parcel to the boundary between the 1998 survey and the 2000 HOA filing," she said. "No court order, no amendment process, no signature from your grandfather, nothing." A pause. "I don't think you're in this HOA legally on paper. I don't think you ever were." The cider press hummed behind me. Last light going orange over the blue ridge through the barn window. The warm, yeasty smell of fermenting apple hanging in the air. Completely indifferent to all of this. "How solid?" I asked. "Solid enough to file on, but I need another day with their financials. I think the boundary question is just the beginning." I told her to take the time she needed. What I found out later was that Apprentice Gable had advised Renata around this same time that the plat discrepancy was unlikely to survive a court challenge. Judges rarely unwind 20-year-old boundary errors, regardless of how they got there. She paid him well for that opinion. She felt better after the call. She shouldn't have, because while Renata was buying reassurance, Davia was still in the records, still pulling threads, still building something Renata didn't know existed yet. I walked the orchard rows that night in the dark. Boots on cold ground, wind through bare branches, the faint smell of wood smoke drifting from somewhere down the road. 2 days later, I found a handwritten note in my mailbox. No name, just "I've been afraid to say anything for 2 years. You're not alone in this. Please don't give up." I taped it to the barn wall next to a faded photograph of Elmer planting the first row in 1962. 2 different kinds of record, both worth keeping. Elmer wasn't a litigious man, but he'd drawn a clear line twice when the developer came knocking and never once moved it. Some lines he used to say, "You draw once." I wasn't planning to move mine either, and somewhere across the development, Renata Holloway was sleeping soundly. Certain, her attorney had told her everything she needed to know. She had no idea what was coming. I want to tell you something about the weeks between Davia's call and what happened next. They were quiet, deceptively quiet. Renata had gone silent. No new letters, no new complaints, no appearances at the property line. I almost convinced myself she was regrouping, reassessing, maybe even backing down. I should have known better. Quiet from a person like Renata isn't retreat, it's preparation. Saturday, late April, 5:47 a.m. You already know what I woke up to. I told you at the beginning, but what I didn't tell you yet is what happened in the hours after, because that's where the story actually turned. The sound came first. That low rolling thunder of hooves, the crack of branches, the thick manure and blossom smell hitting me through the screen door before I was fully awake. I got to the window. 100 Holstein cattle moving through my apple rose lay, like a slow black and white flood, breath misting in the cold morning air, hooves churning 11 years of carefully kept soil into black mud, drip lines burst and spraying sideways, 6 mature Honey Crisps already snapped at the trunk, lying on their sides in the gray dawn light, and at the road's edge, Renata white SUV, arms crossed, that small smug wave. 4 seconds I stood there, maybe 5. Then I moved. First call 911. Calm and specific. Criminal trespass, agricultural vandalism. Active damage to farm infrastructure. Address twice. Deputy requested. Report filed. The dispatcher asked if anyone was injured. I said no people, but approximately 200 linear feet of irrigation and 6 mature fruit trees were gone, and the damage was ongoing. Second call. Davia's emergency line. Voicemail. 4 minutes of detailed timestamp description. Every visual, every measurement I could make from the window, Renata's plate number, Braddock's cattle trailer, still visible at the road. Third, I went to the barn and turned on every exterior camera on the property. I'd installed a 12-camera system the week after the HOA meeting. Not paranoia, just the same instinct that makes you put a drip pan under a water heater you don't entirely trust. Each camera was motion-activated, cloud-backed, time-stamped. I pulled up the live feed on my laptop and started documenting in real time, narrating quietly into a separate voice recording as I watched. When you've spent 20 years diagnosing broken systems under time pressure, you learn that the worst thing you can do in a crisis is react before you document. Reaction is temporary. Documentation is permanent. Augusta County Sheriff's deputies arrived in 20 minutes. 2 of them. They walked the damage with me. The churned rows, the snapped trunks, the irrigation lines still spraying weakly into the mud, the sweet, wrong smell of crushed apple blossom mixing with meh, inure in the cold morning air. One deputy photographed everything. The other took my statement. When I showed him the camera footage, cattle being deliberately driven through the fence line, not wandering through a gap, but driven. Men on ATVs pushing them from behind. He went quiet for a moment. "You want to press charges?" he asked. "I want everything documented first," I said. "I'll make decisions from a complete picture." He nodded, looking at the 6 downed Honey Crisps lying in the mud. "This is messed up," he said. "Not in the report, just to me. Man to man at 6:15 in the morning." I appreciated it. That night, I did what I always do when I need to understand something. I read until I did. Virginia Code Section 5551-2821, Agricultural Trespass. When livestock damage is deliberately directed by a third party, not an accident, not a wandering herd, but an intentional coordinated act, it creates both civil and criminal exposure for whoever gave the order, actual damages, consequential damages, and critically a direct legal line from the cattle in my orchard to the person who put them there. I just needed that line on paper. I spent the next 3 hours doing a written damage inventory. Every tree, every drip line, every section of fence. Waverly had come outside by then, standing at the barn door in her jacket, watching me work. She didn't ask questions. She handed me the measuring tape when I needed it and wrote numbers in the notebook when I called them out. 14 years old, steady as a post. It was around 9:30 when one of Braddock's hired hands came back. I saw his truck slow at the road, stop then pull into the drive. Young guy couldn't have been more than 25. He got out looking like a man who hadn't slept and had spent the morning arguing with his conscience. He held out his phone without saying much on the screen. But text exchange, Renata Holloway's name at the top. I read it once, then again. Her words sent the night before the cattle arrived. "Make sure they get into the main rows. I want him to see what happens when you fight us." I looked up. He said, "I want no part of this. Whatever you need." I photographed every message in the thread. Slowly, carefully, he drove away. I stood in the mud of my ruined orchard, manure and broken wood and the last of the apple blossoms still falling around me like nothing had happened, holding the one thing that changed everything. She had put it in writing. She had actually put it in writing. I forwarded the screenshots to Davia before the mud on my boots had dried. Then I went inside, made coffee, and sat down at the kitchen table with a legal pad. Not to write grievances, to write a plan. Davia called me on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after the livestock event. I was in the barn running the cider press, the mechanical thrum of it filling the space, the smell of crushed apple thick in the air, afternoon light cutting through the side window and long amber bars. Normal Tuesday, except nothing had been normal for months. "I need you to sit down," she said. I turned off the press. "I'm sitting." She'd spent the past 3 weeks doing something she called a financial archaeology dig. Her words, into the HOA's reserve fund structure. She'd been following the money the way you follow a pipe back through a wall, looking for where it originates and whether anyone along the way made a wrong turn. She'd found a wrong turn, a significant one. When the Ridgemont Estates HOA established its reserve fund in 2003, the required balance was calculated using a standard formula, total number of parcels multiplied by a per-unit maintenance obligation. Standard practice completely normal, except the orchard parcel was included in that count. My land, the parcel that had no legal right to be inside the HOA boundary in the first place. The fund had been built year after year, using a financial obligation that didn't legally exist. "How much are we talking?" I asked. "The reserve fund current balance is $387,000. Davia said, "The portion attributable to the illegal parcel inclusion, compounded over 20 years of contributions and interest, comes to approximately $22,000 in direct disgorgement exposure." But that's the conservative number. I had to ask, what's discouragement? She explained it, the way good attorneys explain things, like she'd done it 100 times, and genuinely wanted me to understand. When a party obtains a financial benefit through an illegal or unauthorized act, A court can order them to surrender that benefit, not as punishment, simply because you don't get to keep what you obtained wrongfully. The HOA had been calculating its reserve fund against a parcel it had no authority to include. A court could order the portion of that fund attributable to the illegal inclusion to be discouraged, paid out. The reserve fund, the $387,000 that Renata's entire legal operation was quietly banking on as a safety net. There's more, Davia said. When we file for declaratory judgment that the orchard parcel was never lawfully included, we can attach a list pendants to the reserve fund account. It's a legal notice that freezes the asset while litigation is active. The HOA can't spend it, can't move it, can't use it to pay Apprentice Gable's invoices while they're fighting us. They'll have to fund their legal defense from operating dues from the homeowner's monthly payments. I sat with that for a moment. The press was still. The barn was quiet, except for the low hum of the chest freezer and the sound of a bird somewhere outside doing the same thing it did every afternoon, completely unbothered. So, we're not just arguing I don't belong in this HOA. I said slowly. No, Davia said. We're going We're going Fair the fund. I thought about the 6 Honey Crisps lying in the mud, about Waverly's college fund, about Elmer's boundary line that someone had moved in the dark 20 years ago, thinking nobody would ever look closely enough to notice. They had moved his line. Do it, I said. All of it. The next 2 weeks felt different from everything that came before. Before I'd been reacting, letter arrives, respond, complaint filed, defend, cattle in the orchard, document and call the lawyer. Every move I made was one step behind Renata's, and even when I won those exchanges, I was still playing her game on her timeline. That changed the morning Davia filed the civil complaint in Augusta County Circuit Court. She called me when it was done. It's in, she said. Just that, 2 words. But I felt the shift the same way you feel a pressure system change before a storm. The air going different, something fundamental rearranging itself. The complaint had 5 counts. Davia walked me through them that evening in her office. The case files spread across her desk, outside the window, the last October light going gold over the stunted rooftops. She talked. I listened. And for the first time in months, I wasn't listening to figure out how to survive something. I was listening to understand how to win. First, declaratory judgment, a court declaration that the orchard parcel was never lawfully inside the HOA boundary. Not an argument, a legal fact established on the record. Permanent. Second, trespass and agricultural vandalism. $68,000 in actual damages for the destroyed trees and irrigation, plus 3 years of projected Honeycrisp harvest revenue on top. Third, tortious interference. The coordinated zoning complaint campaign wasn't just aggressive, it was deliberate interference with my business, and Virginia law has a remedy for that. Fourth, discouragement of the reserve fund contribute. Ion's fifth. Attorney's fees because Virginia's HOA Dispute Resolution Act allows full fee shifting when a party acts in demonstrable bad faith. 5 counts, I said. 5 counts, Davia confirmed. She picked up her coffee. She came at you with everything she had. We're going back with everything we have. The text messages went to the sheriff's office the same week, not as a civil exhibit, as criminal evidence. The investigation that followed resulted in formal charges against Renata Holloway and Gus Braddock under Virginia Code Section 5512821. 2821. Class 1 misdemeanor, real charges, real court dates, real criminal defense attorneys. Suddenly, Renata wasn't just managing a civil lawsuit, she was managing 2 legal fronts simultaneously on her own dime. Fletcher Oakes agreed to serve as our expert witness without hesitation. I drove out to his place on a Thursday morning. A tidy property off Route 250, smell of wood smoke and motor oil. A man who spent 35 years measuring land and had very strong feelings about people who moved lines they had no right to touch. He already had the original survey blueprints pulled from his own archived copies. He spread them on his workbench and walked me through his analysis with the patience of someone who has explained complex things to non-speists his entire career and doesn't mind doing it again. I drew that line, he said, tapping the boundary with one finger. I know exactly where I drew it, and I know exactly where I drew it, and I know exactly where someone moved it. He would say exactly that in court. I had no doubt the list pendants hit the HOA's reserve fund account like a quiet thunderclap. Most people have never heard the term. Its Latin means suit pending. When you file a list pendants against a financial asset, you're attaching a legal notice to it that says, this money is contested. It cannot be moved, spent, liquidated, or used for any purpose, while litigation is active. The HOA's $387,000 reserve fund was now frozen solid. Renata could not touch it. More importantly, she could not use it to pay Apprentice Gable, which meant the HOA had to fund its legal defense from operating dues from every homeowner's monthly payment from the pockets of the same neighbors. Renata had spent 2 years telling that she was protecting their interests. The coalition that had packed that community room against me began to crack almost immediately. I spent the following weekend installing a new fence line along the orchard's legal boundary, the 1998 survey line, not the HOA's revised version. Cedar posts, wire mesh, properly permitted. 2 new cameras aimed specifically at the road access points where the cattle had entered. If anything happened again, I would have video from 8 angles before the dust settled. Waverly helped me set the posts on Saturday afternoon, the 2 of us working in comfortable silence, the smell of fresh-cut cedar sharp in the cool air, the Blue Ridge going purple in the distance as the sun dropped. She drove a post stake with one clean swing and said without looking up, "We're almost at the good part, aren't we?" I drove the next stake and almost, I said. Renata went quiet again after the list pendants hit, not the preparation quiet of before. This was different, tighter, more deliberate. The quiet of someone who has just realized the ground shifted under them and is trying to figure out which way to fall. I recognized it the same way I recognized the 3 zoning complaints, as a pattern, as a tell. She came back 2 weeks later, but this time she didn't use lawyers or county offices. She used Facebook. The Ridgemont Estates' private community group had 600 members. Renata was the admin. She'd built it over 3 years as a neighborhood information board. Lost dogs, road closures, garage sales, harmless enough. Boo. Tents collapsed under the weight. Now she turned it into something else entirely. Post after post, carefully worded, building a narrative that had almost no relationship to reality. Our neighborhood is being exploited by a commercial operator who refuses to pay his fair share. Multiple residents have reported health concerns related to the orchard operation. The ongoing legal situation is a direct result of one property owner's refusal to work with the community, and the one that made Davia's eyes go sharp when I forwarded it to her. Sources indicate the orchard cider operation has a history of health code violations, complete fabrication, not a single health code violation on record ever. But 600 people saw it, and a meaningful number of them believed it long enough to call the county health department and complain, which meant I was once again fielding bureaucratic inquiries I hadn't earned. I documented every post, screenshot, timestamp, date. Davia filed a motion to add defamation to the civil complaint before the week was out. Then Renata went after the farmers markets. She emailed 3 market managers where I held vendor spots. Calm, official-sounding emails, CC'd to nobody referencing the fabricated health violations and suggesting my permit should be reviewed in the interest of public safety. 2 of the managers forwarded the emails directly to me within 24 hours. One of them added a note that said simply, "Thought you should see this. We're not pulling your spot." The 3rd manager called Davia's office to ask if there was anything they should know. Davia told him the allegations were fabricated. The source was a party to active litigation against my operation and that any action taken against my permits based on those emails could constitute participation in tortious interference. He thanked her and that was the end of that. The emails went into the file. The torch interference claim got tent. Icker. What I found out later through the same network of quiet neighbors that had been feeding me information since the beginning was that Renata had also approached Gus Braddock with an offer, a cash payment described as a consulting fee in exchange for a signed statement, claiming the livestock event had been conducted with my knowledge and at my invitation, a document that would directly contradict the text messages, undermine the criminal investigation, and potentially collapse the civil damages claim. Braddock said no, not because he developed a conscience exactly, but because he wasn't willing to add perjury to a charge sheet that was already longer than he bargained for. He told her no once. She pushed, He stopped returning her calls. When I heard this, I felt something I hadn't expected. Almost sympathy for the position she'd put herself in. Almost. Then I remembered the 6 Honey Crisps, and it passed quickly. Through all of this, the Facebook campaign, the market emails, the failed bribery, I kept working. Press running, market weekends happening, fence going up section by section, cameras covering every angle. And something else was happening that Renata couldn't see and couldn't stop. The homeowners whose monthly dues were now funding her legal defense were starting to do the math. The pool house roof repair had been deferred for the 2nd consecutive season because the reserve fund was frozen. Small maintenance items were backing up. At the October HOA meeting, which I was not invited to and did not attend, 3 board members reportedly asked Renata directly how much longer the litigation was expected to continue and what the projected total legal costs would be. She didn't have a good answer. I know this because one of those board members texted a neighbor who texted me. The message was 4 words. Cracks are showing. Good. I read it standing at the barn workbench, the smell of cedar from the new fence post still on my hands, the cider press running its evening cycle behind me. I set the phone down and went back to work. Patience, my grandfather used to say, is just preparation with better posture. I was being very patient. 2 months before the trial date, Renata made her most desperate move yet. She called a special HOA meeting, emergency session, homeowners notified 48 hours in advance. Agenda item listed as community blighting influence and injunctive relief options. I found out about it through Dolph Maines, a contractor who'd been on the board since before Renata's tenure, and had been quietly uncomfortable with her methods for longer than he'd admitted publicly. He texted me the agenda the morning it went out. I read it twice, then I called Davia. The resolution Renata pushed through that night with a board that was now down 2 members who'd quietly stopped showing up declared my orchard a community blighting influence and authorized the HOA to seek a court injunction to force the cessation of all commercial activity on my property pending the outcome of the lawsuit. Apprentice Gable, who was somehow still billing, filed the injunction motion the following Monday. It was audacious. I'll give her that. The motion argued that my cider sales and pick-your-own operation constituted irreparable harm to the community and that the court should shut me down before the trial even happened, before a single piece of evidence was weighed, before Judge Harlan Presswood had heard 1 word of testimony. Fall pick-your-own season was 8 weeks away. Waverly's college fund was partially riding on it. If the injunction was granted, we'd lose the entire revenue event, and with it the financial stability that had kept us operational through 2 years of legal warfare. I got the motion notice on a Thursday morning, read it at the kitchen counter. Waverly was eating cereal across from me, backpack already on 15 minutes from the school bus. She looked at the paper in my hand. Bad news, manageable news, I said. She considered that. Is there a difference? There is, when you have Davia Merritt. Davia's opposition brief was 31 pages. I read every word. She argued 4 things with the precision of someone dismantling a machine she'd studied for months. First, there was no irreparable harm. My operation caused no physical damage to the community, generated no credible nuisance, and the HOA's own record showed 0 formal complaints from residents about the orchard in the preceding 12 months. Second, the HOA lacked standing to seek an injunction because the orchard was not lawfully inside their jurisdiction, a point now supported by Fletcher's expert analysis and partially conceded in the HOA's own discovery responses. Third, granting the injunction would cause me irreparable harm, destroying a seasonal agricultural business at its single most critical revenue moment. Fourth, the motion itself was evidence of continued bad faith litigation which strengthened our attorney's fees claim under Virginia's HOA Dispute Resolution Act. 31 pages, every page a closed door. Judge Harlan Presswood heard the motion on a Wednesday morning, 64 years old, Augusta County born and raised, the kind of judge who grew up understanding the difference between a working farm and a subdivision amenity. He had reportedly little patience for clever legal arguments dressed up as community protection. He denied the injunction from the bench, 12 minutes of oral argument. 12 minutes. He described the motion as facially insufficient and procedurally premature. Then, unprompted without either party asking him to, he noted on the record that the pattern of conduct documented in the case raised significant concerns about the good faith of the moving party. On the record, permanent in the official transcript, that would follow this case wherever it went. Davia called me from the courthouse steps. I could hear the Stanton traffic behind her. She didn't say much, just 12 minutes, and he editorialized a pause. He never editorializes. The same week, Apprentice Gable withdrew from the case. His withdrawal letter cited irreconcilable conflicts, standard cover language for a man who has looked at where a case is heading and decided his reputation isn't worth the destination. He sent one final invoice for $8,400. Renata paid it. She was now represented by a sole practitioner who primarily handled DUI defense and had never litigated HOA law in his career. At the next regular HOA meeting, Dolph Main stood up and said publicly on the record in front of every homeowner present, "I never thought we'd be using HOA money to fight a man who just wants to grow apples." The room applauded. At an HOA meeting, they actually applauded. Waverly heard about it from a neighbor's kid at school the next day and came home laughing for the first time in months. She found me in the orchard doing evening rounds and said, "Dad, they clapped. I heard at an HOA meeting." "I know." She shook her head, still grinning, and walked back toward the barn. The last of the day's light was going down behind the Blue Ridge, turning the sky that particular shade of October orange that makes the whole valley look like it's on fire in the best possible way. We were 1 month from trial. The Augusta County Circuit Court doesn't look like the courtrooms you see in movies. No marble columns, no dramatic lighting, just wood paneling, fluorescent overhead fixtures, the smell of old paper and central heating running slightly too warm for an October morning. Folding gallery benches that creak when you shift your weight, a water pitcher on the judge's bench that nobody ever seems to refill. But the room was full. 24 Ridgemont Estates homeowners in the gallery. Some who'd voted against me at that first packed meeting. Some who'd signed declarations supporting my case. Most somewhere in the complicated middle that neighbors occupy when a 2-year war finally reaches its last day. Dolph Mains was there. Second row, arms folded, jaw set. The anonymous knot writer was there. I recognized the handwriting on a card they'd left at my truck that morning. "Finish it." A reporter from the Staunton News sat in the press section with a notepad and a recorder, and Waverly, second row, right side, wearing the flannel jacket she wore on pick-your-own weekends, like a piece of armor she'd chosen deliberately. She gave me one nod when I looked back at her. That was enough. Fletcher Oakes took the stand first. 71 years old, broad-shouldered, unhurried. He brought the original 1998 survey blueprints, oversized, physical, unfolded on the court display stand like a map of exactly how this whole thing started. He walked Judge Presswood through the discrepancy with the patience of a man who has spent 35 years explaining complex spatial data to people who needed to understand it and always made sure they did. Renata's new attorney, the DUI specialist, visibly uncomfortable in HOA territory, objected 3 times during Fletcher's testimony. Each objection was overruled. On the third one, Judge Presswood looked at him for a moment without speaking before saying, over in a tone that suggested the fourth objection would not be well received, Fletcher pointed to his boundary line on the blueprint. "I drew that line," he said. "I know where I drew it." He tapped the discrepancy. "And I know where I drew it." He tapped the discrepancy. "And I know where someone moved it." Then Davia stood up and read the text messages into the record. She did it slowly, deliberately. No theatrical emphasis, just Renata, Holloway's own words spoken aloud in a room full of her neighbors, her attorney, and a court reporter capturing every syllable for the permanent record. "Make sure they get into the main rows. I want him to see what happens when you fight us." The gallery was completely silent. Renata sat at the defense table and did not move. Her attorney objected on authentication grounds, his last credible card. De Villa had anticipated it. The phone carrier records subpoenaed weeks earlier confirmed the message origin, the timestamp, the account holder. Judge Presswood overruled the objection without looking up from the documents in front of him. The HOA's own discovery responses finished the job. In the pre-trial discovery process, the HOA's management company, distancing themselves carefully from Renata's decisions, had produced internal records showing that the orchard parcel's inclusion in the CC and RS had been added by a developer employee in 1999, without authorization, without legal amendment, without my grandfather's knowledge or consent. The developer's company no longer existed. The employee was deceased, but the paper trail was clear, and it said the same thing Fletcher's survey said, and Davia's timeline said. Nobody had ever had the legal right to put my land inside that boundary. Not once. Not for a single day in 23 years. Judge Preswood did not wait for day 2. At the end of the afternoon session, he removed his glasses, set them on the bench, and looked at both tables with the expression of a man who has reached a conclusion and sees no reason to delay saying it out loud. He issued the declaratory judgment from the bench. The orchard parcel was not, and never had been, lawfully within the jurisdiction of Ridgemont Estates, HOA. All fines, CC and R requirements, and HOA instruments applied to the parcel were void ab initio, from the very beginning, as if they had never existed. He scheduled the damages hearing for the following month. Davia stood immediately and moved for attorney's fees under Virginia's HOA Dispute Resolution Act. Judge Preswood granted the motion in principle without hesitation. The defense had nothing to say. Literally, Renata's attorney sat with his pen in his hand and said nothing. In the hallway afterward, Renata walked past me without speaking, phone already to her ear, already calling someone. She looked smaller than she had in that parking lot 18 months ago. Not physically, just smaller. The authority she'd worn like a second skin had somewhere along the way stopped fitting. Outside the courthouse steps, cold October air, the Blue Ridge visible to the west, the smell of dried leaves and coming winter. The news leader reporter caught up to me. "Mr. Beaumont, do you have a comment?" I thought about it for exactly 1 second. "Go check on your own HOA's financials," I said. "That's my comment." It ran as the headline the next morning. Waverly found me on the steps and grabbed my arm and didn't say anything at all. We stood there together for a moment, the two of us, the mountains, the cold, clean air. That was enough. That was the whole thing right there. The damages hearing was 30 days later. Judge Preswood awarded everything, $68,000 in actual damages for the destroyed trees and irrigation infrastructure. For the destroyed trees and irrigation infrastructure, $47,000 in consequential damages, 3 years of projected Honeycrisp harvest revenue, calculated from my own sales records and corroborated by a regional agricultural economist. Davia had retained $38,200 in attorney's fees and court costs, and $22,000 in disgorgement. The portion of the HOA's reserve fund built against a parcel that had no legal right to be included in the calculation returned with interest $175,200 total to be paid from the Ridgemont Estates HOA reserve fund. The same fund Renata had frozen with her legal warfare. The same fund she'd counted on as her safety net. The same fund her neighbors had been contributing to for 20 years. The $387,000 didn't disappear entirely, but it took a hit serious enough that the new board, because there was a new board now, was going to be managing deferred maintenance and higher dues for years to come. That wasn't my intention, but it was Renata's consequence. She didn't finish her term. A recall petition hit 61% of homeowners within 3 weeks of the trial verdict. She resigned before the vote was formalized. Her resignation letter, which someone forwarded to me without comment, contained no apology and no acknowledgement of what she'd done, just procedural language about transitioning responsibilities and wishing the community well. The criminal trespass charges resulted in a plea deal, no jail time, 2 years probation, and $8,000 in personal restitution paid directly to me for immediate crop damage. Gus Braddock received 18 months probation and paid $3,500. Neither outcome was dramatic, but both were permanent. Both followed them. Dolph Maines was elected HOA president at the next regular meeting unopposed. With the damages award, I replaced the 6 destroyed Honeycrisps and planted 4 more, a new row properly spaced on the south side of the orchard where the light was best. They'll produce in 3 years. Waverly helped me plant them on a Saturday in November. The two of us working in the cold with the smell of turned earth and bare rootstock, the mountains going gray, blue in the distance. She asked me what we should name the new row. I said, we'd call it the Elmer Row. She thought about it. He would have hated all of this. She said, he would have hated the conflict. I said, he would have liked the outcome. She nodded, pressed the next tree into the ground. Yeah, she said, he would have liked the outcome. I took $25,000 of the damages award and established had the Elmer Bowman Agricultural Scholarship at Blue Ridge Community College, won $2,500 annual scholarship for a student pursuing agricultural science, sustainable food systems, or rural land management. Named for a man who planted trees in 1962 because good land shouldn't sit idle. The first recipient was a young woman from 2 towns over who wanted to specialize in orchard management and had been working grocery store nights to save for school. She came to the fall, pick your own weekend that year. Waverly gave her the tour, row by row, variety by variety, the whole 11 acres. I watched them from the barn door, the 2 of them moving through the trees in the October light, talking about soil and rootstock and the particular stubbornness required to grow something that takes years to pay off. Elmer would have liked that too. The following October, we opened for the biggest pick, your own weekend in the orchard's history. 400 people, food trucks, a bluegrass band, a cider tasting station, a conservation booth where a local nonprofit explained how working orchards support native pollinator populations. We called it the Ridgemont Orchard Fall Festival, a small, deliberate reclamation of the name. Dolph Maines came with his family, paid admission at the gate, shook my hand at the entrance, and said simply, "Good apples this year, best in a while," I said. The reporter from the news leader came back and wrote a follow-up piece, not about the lawsuit this time, about the festival, about the scholarship, about what a working orchard looks like when nobody is trying to destroy it. That's the story I wanted told from the beginning. Look, I'm not going to stand here and tell you this was easy, or that I wasn't scared at points, or that watching 6 of Elmer's trees lying in the mud that April morning didn't break something in me temporarily. It did. It broke something. And then built something harder in its place. What I'll tell you is this. The trees my grandfather planted are still growing. That's the whole story. Everything else, Renata, the cattle, the lawyers, the reserve fund, all of it was just noise around something that was never going to stop growing. Some lines you draw once, you don't move them. BC, there's a moment in this story I keep coming back to. Not the verdict, not the courtroom. 100 cows in a man's orchard at 5:47 in the morning. Deli greatly driven through trees. His grandfather planted by hand in 1962 and ran out of hallway standing at the row's edge, watching it happen, giving him a little wave that way. That's what this whole thing was built on. The absolute suddenly that court would fail. Thus, he'd be too tired, too overwhelmed, too arrogant to fight back. She is miscalculated. The same morning he was documenting, calling his lawyer, pulling camera footage while she was watching cows destroy his orchestra. He was already 3 moves ahead. 18 months later, $175,000 out of her reserve fund, her board gone, her position gone, court orchestra still standing, evertrees still growing. Have you dealt with something like this? A bee that came with you sideways, confident you wouldn't push back. Drop it below. I read everyone, and surprise if this entire story you here for. There are more coming.